My name is Howard Bond, and I was born at the beginning of the Great Depression in 1931 in the last house on the edge of a small town in Ohio. I remember that homeless men often walked past on US 6, and my mother sometimes fed them. One evening, I was in the yard with the older of my two sisters, Carmen, when she told me about the solar system. I'm still interested in astronomy and astrophysics. As a preschooler, I had a pet rabbit that we kept in the chicken coop, but it was pecked to death by the chickens. The summer I turned 6, we moved across the river, and I was able to attend the central school, which had all 12 grades in one building. From the 1st to the 10th grade, I was in love with Marion, a musician, good student, and the most beautiful girl in the world, I thought. In the 3rd grade, I started piano lessons. When I started cornet in the 5th grade, my parents let me quit the piano, which of course I later regretted. Also in the 5th grade, the whole elementary school put on an operetta. Everyone was in it except 3 of us. 2 big dumb guys who had failed to pass several times, and me. I was too shy to participate. About a week before the performance, Tom Reese, who was playing the lead as the Black Cat, got sick, and the music teacher drafted me. I learned to sing my solo, my mother made me a Black Cat costume, and the show went on. The worst thing about it was I had to kiss the hand of the princess. My cornet teacher was Mike Lombardi, who came from Naples, Italy, playing solo clarinet with the Creator Band, a professional group similar to the Sousa Band. It took a couple of months of lessons before I could understand his heavy accent, but after he was my teacher for 8 years, I loved him. Because all 12 grades were in one building, I was able to start playing in the high school band in the 7th grade. There were many opportunities during high school to play solos and in ensembles. Eventually, as first chair cornetist in the band, I was able to play in the orchestra, county 4-H band, pep band, and taps at military funerals. In the 11th and 12th grades, I led a Glenn Miller-style dance band that played for our school dances and those in neighboring towns. We even had a weekly radio program for a while. A combo consisting of half the members of my group had a regular dance job on alternate Saturdays during our senior year. I noticed during the 11th grade that the number of performances was getting rather large, so I kept a careful log during the 12th grade and found that I played before some sort of audience 200 times. In the summer of 1949, after having just graduated from high school, planning to begin studying music education at Bowling Green State University in September, I attended church camp as usual. With college looming, I didn't want to get out of condition by missing a week of playing, so I brought my cornet and some solo music to church camp, hoping to find an accompanist for the Tuesday evening talent night. During free time on Monday, I met with the accompanist for the camp chorus to choose a solo. We started with the difficult one I wanted to play and progressed to the easiest one, but she couldn't sight read any of them. Another couple was waiting to use the piano, and finally the boy said, "Why don't you let Margaret try it?" The boy was Roger Barnes, a tenor from her high school who had performed with Margaret many times and knew that she could play anything I might set before her. We played my most difficult piece on Tuesday night, had our first date on Thursday evening, and promptly began going to dances when we arrived at Bowling Green. I had wanted to conduct, but not being a musical prodigy, there was no way for me to become a symphony orchestra conductor. As a practical way to be able to conduct, I settled on being an instrumental music teacher and being a high school band director. At Bowling Green, Margaret and I had nearly all of our classes together. Among them, theory, harmony, counterpoint, form and analysis, symphonic literature, conducting, band arranging, and choruses on all the instruments. We also had weekly lessons on our major instruments, clarinet and piano in Margaret's case, and trumpet for me, plus playing in band and orchestra. We had a course called Sight Singing and Ear Training that met 4 hours a week for 4 semesters, in which we learned to sing with the syllables do, re, mi, etc. This had the effect of enabling us to sight read almost anything vocally, a useful skill for future conductors who would often need to sing a passage when telling a group how they wanted it played or sung. Because all music students were in this class, we noticed that the voice majors were there because they had pretty voices, but the instrumental majors tended to be good readers after years of study. We used a book for sight singing class called containing exercises in all rhythms and keys, from which Professor Alexander assigned some for each class period. Margaret practiced them, but most of us didn't, and Alexander soon learned that she was dependable. One day he called on her to sing an especially difficult one and gave her the keynote with his pitch pipe. Singing unaccompanied, she uncharacteristically got way off, causing some classmates to smile. This was much less than the mirth directed at the bored and inattentive professor when he said without checking at the end, "Very good, Miss Wepler." Later we began to feel empathy for him because he was stuck with teaching the boring sight singing and beginning violin classes while Gerald McLaughlin taught the violin majors. Jerry, who conducted the BGSU orchestra and was concertmaster of the Toledo Symphony, became our dear friend after we graduated. He always let me win 2 out of 5 games of ping pong. Margaret typically didn't get paid for the many accompaniments she played in college. Chuck Gorsuch apparently felt bad about not being able to afford to reward her for all the work she did to accompany his violin recital, so 50 years later he surprised her with a $1,000 check. In our freshman year, Margaret and I played in the pit orchestra for the Smetana opera, The Bartered Bride. In the spring, we were chosen to play in the Ohio Intercollegiate Band, conducted by Morton Gould. I played in the Ohio Intercollegiate Band again as a senior, and the National Intercollegiate Band shortly after graduation. The music for dances during our first 2 years at BGSU was provided by Hal Caudill's big band, playing wonderful arrangements by Doug Hartzell, a brilliant trombonist who was 2 years ahead of us in school. During our 3rd year, he began teaching in a nearby town, and the next year he formed a band on campus in which I got to play his thrilling arrangements. We still got together with Doug when Doug was in his late 70s after he had taught, published many band compositions, and was very busy playing in big bands, including a couple of occasions with Stan Kenton. In 1950, I bought my first car, a 1930 Model A Ford. It cost about $65 and was about all one could expect for that price. It wasn't at its best in winter because there was no glass in the driver's side door. The radiator had a serious leak, but it had one luxury. By 1930, Fords had electric starters instead of hand cranks. Bowling Green is 25 miles away from my hometown, and fortunately, there was a gas station halfway between. If I left home with a full radiator and a gallon jug of water, I could empty the jug into the radiator at the 1/4 point and stop at the gas station to fill the jug and the radiator. With the water from the jug added at the 3/4 point, I could just make it. At the beginning of our second year at Bowling Green, my future wife could stop living in a dormitory and live at home because her mother moved to Bowling Green. This was a nice fringe benefit for us because in those days, female students were not allowed to ride in cars unless they lived at home. And I had a car. Margaret was usually the first to arrive at the music building in the morning and the last to leave in the evening, accompanied by me. Her mother was usually in bed when we got there, and we could be alone in the kitchen for a while. My dad kidded me about being under Margaret's spell after I told him that hot tap water in her kitchen tasted like tea. In our third year, there was a campus dance with a Sadie Hawkins theme derived from the Little Abner comic strip in which a boy caught by a girl on Sadie Hawkins Day had to marry her. I had a very old-fashioned suit with vest I had bought for $5 during high school and work shoes and a misshapen felt hat. Margaret put patches on my suit. We won the prize for the best dressed couple. Also, in the third year, Margaret played a whole piano recital, and her accompanying included a recital and up to a dozen exam solos. There was a quack voice teacher who was supposed to teach a choral literature class, but he didn't teach anything, so there was nothing on which to grade us. He simply gave the voice majors an A and the instrumental majors a B. Our conducting teacher also gave Margaret a B in spite of her high exam scores, but the cute gal who babysat for him got an A. Our suspicion that she babysat him was strengthened when she ran away with another married man the next summer. When we were there, the music department occupied the second floor of a building in which the home ec department was on the first floor. The noise we generated was a real nuisance and continuing source of irritation for them. Imagine a large, high-ceilinged classroom that had been made into a number of practice rooms, with a central aisle flanked by cubicles, each just large enough to contain an upright piano. The cubicle I was using on a sunny day was very hot because the shade on the south-facing window had retracted above the false ceiling. The cubicle next to mine contained the room's only radiator and therefore had no ceiling so heat could escape. It occurred to me that I could climb on its piano, crawl along the 6-inch wide top of the partition separating that cubicle from the aisle, and get to the top of mine to reach the window shade. Starting to climb on the next door piano, I put my foot on the end of its bench. Unfortunately, the lid was not attached, and the other end rose up a foot or so. When I quickly removed my foot, the far end came down with a tremendous bang that was transmitted efficiently through the bench's legs to the floor and to the classroom below. Placing my foot carefully in the center of the lid, I succeeded in making my way to the top of the piano and thence to the top of the partition. As I was advancing precariously on hands and knees along the narrow top, one of the lady professors from the home ec department came storming in, clearly ready for battle. However, all she could manage was a plaintive, "What do you people do up here anyway?" Before I could explain, she stomped out. I got my shade down. In our senior year, the climax of Margaret's piano performances occurred when she played Anton Rubinstein's Piano Concerto No. 3 with the University Orchestra. Later, While obtaining a master's degree in piano performance at Eastern Michigan University, she played a Mozart concerto with their orchestra. She also played the Grieg Piano Concerto with high school band accompaniment conducted by me. I used to fantasize about her playing the Rachmaninoff Second with me conducting an orchestra, but that was beyond both of us. For band arranging class, we were assigned to compose melodies for a march and arrange them for band. We both arranged melodies I had written, reasoning that this was an arranging class, not a composition class. The teacher, Professor Bornstead, played for our wedding in the university chapel shortly after, and we were still in touch nearly 60 years later. Soon after graduation, I arranged the tunes Margaret had used for the class assignment, and this version was published in 1956. Around 2010, I substantially revised the march I had arranged for the class, and it received performances by 3 bands, including the Indiana Wind Symphony and the Ann Arbor Concert Band. During our senior year, we each had part-time teaching jobs in small schools nearby. On the Friday before Christmas vacation, some of the students learned that I would get married that evening and were surprised that I could work that day. I didn't think it remarkable. Being the groom is easy. We started living in an apartment in a sagging, surplus World War II Army barracks for $21 a month. At graduation, there was one other student in the whole university whose grade point average was a fraction higher than Margaret's. I think she would have been alone on top if 2 professors had given her the A's she deserved. I took a job conducting the high school band and choruses in Blissfield, Michigan, just over the border from Ohio and 38 miles from Ann Arbor. Because I had to conduct choruses, we attended the Fred Waring choral workshop in the summer before starting to teach, and again the next summer. The techniques I learned there were a great help with the school choruses and later with church choirs. The previous fall, Gilbert Blanks, the Blissfield band director, had been killed in an automobile accident. This increased the loyalty to him felt by the students and put the band in the hands of a mediocre replacement for the rest of the year. When I arrived, the band wasn't very good, and a couple of classes would have to graduate before the loyalty to Blanks dissipated and it became my band. Margaret and I began teaching many private lessons after school and on Saturdays, and got students from the U of M to teach Saturday lessons, and entered a great many students in annual solo and ensemble festivals. It became a 6 or 7 day per week job year-round, partly because I did so much I wouldn't have had to do, including arranging all of the music for football halftime shows. The band improved by leaps and bounds and started consistently getting 1 ratings at the District Band and Orchestra Festival. During the last couple of years, we were playing compositions that were a pleasure to conduct. While at Blissfield, I went summers to the U of M for an MA in instrumental music education, studying conducting and band arranging with Eric Leidzin and conducting with the famous William D. Ravelli. For that degree, I had French horn as my major instrument because I was playing it in the Hillsdale Orchestra, the Adrian Summer Band, and the All-American Bandmasters Band. Stress was nearly constant, as was the pressure to develop the right combination of young players on the instruments the band would need when they got to high school. In the end, I was just worn out and realized that no matter how much the band improved, it would never be as good as I wanted it to be. Lining up for my last Memorial Day parade, first chair clarinetist Janet Petit asked pleadingly, "Do you have to leave?" And many years later, the lady who had played first chair French horn said to me, I loved you when I was in high school. The students didn't know I loved them. During the last semester I taught, I took high school algebra at Toledo University, and the next summer 2 more math courses in preparation for entering the U of M College of Engineering as an electrical engineering student. They were skeptical about my chances for success, so I took pleasure in showing them that I could get all A's. Taking first-year physics and chemistry at engineering school was tremendously exciting. For the final unknown in qualitative analysis, I was given uranium, which I soon identified from some chemical reactions. Though not needed for the course, I made a cloud chamber that enabled me to photograph alpha trails from the radioactive uranium. Although uranium decays very slowly to thorium, I expected a little of that to be present. So I separated the small amount of thorium and evaporated the water, after which I was able to photograph beta trails from it. With a wife and 2 children, 4 years to get an engineering degree was too long, so I shortened my re-education to 3 years by switching to the graduate school for an MS in math. All of the math courses were fun, especially calculus, but the most exciting were the computer courses taught by Bernie Galler, a national leader in his field. I was old for a student, and Bernie was young for a professor, and we really hit it off. Afterward, he offered me a job in the U of M Computing Center, but I didn't take it. His widow, Enid, is now my friend at Glacier Hills. Bernie Galler was a serious violinist and played in the Ann Arbor Symphony. Years later, when I was conducting a church choir, I wanted to do portions of the Messiah at Christmas time, so I borrowed the music from the university and recruited a string orchestra to accompany us. Bernie played first violin for me 2 years running. Computer programming was fun, and I was very well trained for it. Writing programs and having a computer run them was rather like arranging music and having it performed. I worked for 5 employers, and one of the first was in Santa Barbara. There I started practicing my trumpet again and playing in the feeder orchestra for the Santa Barbara Symphony. In the spring I got promoted and played 1 concert with the symphony before returning to Michigan. The occasion was significant for me because it was my last instrumental performance, and the program included Liszt's Les Préludes, which I had played on French horn in the Hillsdale Symphony. It was the only composition I ever played on 2 instruments. My penultimate computer programming job was with the U of M School of Public Health, which had a joint project with the government of Malaysia that required me to work there for several weeks on 3 occasions. Because Malaysia is nearly on the opposite side of the world, I only had to chip in a little toward the airfare each time to go all the way around. The first time, Margaret accompanied me, and we had some vacation time in Hawaii, Nepal, and Austria. The first stop was the Hawaiian island of Kauai, the Garden Island. There we saw the beautiful Waimea Canyon, the Grand Canyon of the Pacific, and hiked along the northwest shore, which lacked a road. As we progressed on the trail through the trees, we met a young man with a full beard. He seemed to belong there and was almost past us when we noticed that his backpack was the only thing he was wearing. Farther along, we came to a hippie encampment where none of the young people wore clothes. In Nepal, we spent a couple of days in Kathmandu before flying 100 miles west to the village of Pokhara, where the cows had to be shooed off the grass runway. During our morning walks, we looked at the nearby base of the Annapurna Range up to where the mountains disappeared into a bank of clouds. Then we saw them emerge above the clouds, many degrees higher in the sky than we expected. In Malaysia, Margaret was befriended by Sui Lin, also known as Daphne, an 18-year-old girl of Chinese ancestry who showed her around Kuala Lumpur while I was at work at the Department of Statistics. Referring to a group of teenage boys who were staying in our hotel, she said, "If one of them touches me, I'll go haywire." Later, I think she went haywire when she met Brendan. Later, as a nursing student in London, she fell in love with Brendan, a fellow student from Ireland, and they entered into an unhappy marriage. We became more entangled in the remarkable soap opera that was Daphne's life when we invited her to visit us in the United States one summer. She considered staying in the U.S. permanently, but Brendan said if she didn't come home, he would shoot me. So we encouraged her to return. Subsequently, though, she ran away with a Japanese man she had known before her marriage, and my relationship with Brendan improved. Our last stop was Austria, where a photographer friend had bought us tickets for the opening night of the Vienna State Opera season. The loud plaid sport coat I had with me was embarrassing at the opera, where many wore formal dress, but the evening was thrilling nevertheless. Other highlights of our visit to Austria were a trip to photograph in the Southern Alps and getting connected to a gallery in Vienna that began selling my photographs. Our department chairman made periodic trips to Malaysia, where we usually had one of our people on assignment. Once I asked him how many times he had been around the world, and he didn't know. Photography had started when my aunt gave me a simple camera during the 8th grade, and I started developing pictures in our bathroom. I then began using the school's darkroom and borrowing my father's good Zeiss camera, which used individual sheets of film. This was the beginning of a lifetime of using big cameras that required sheet film to be loaded into holders before setting out to make photographs. Photography was a serious hobby during high school, and I photographed the wedding of one of my sisters in November of my senior year using the Zeiss. When Ray Ward, proprietor of a local portrait and wedding studio, saw my sister's pictures, he invited me to come to work for him for the second semester and through college. With Ray's discount, I was finally able to afford the reliable 4x5 speed graphic I had dreamed of for several years. You may have seen these big press cameras in old movies, with a silver battery case along one side and a reflector for flash bulbs above. Between exposures with the speed graphic, it was necessary to replace the dark slide in the film holder, replace the film holder, cock the shutter, adjust the lens aperture, focus, and replace the flash bulb. Think about that the next time you snap a beautiful picture with your fully automatic smartphone. With both of us covering a wedding, we could do 2 pictures in quick succession. Also, we could handle 2 simultaneous weddings. Photographing weddings contributed to the support of my family while I was getting my MS in math. By the time I started working as a computer programmer, I had become interested in photography as a fine art. Civilized working hours as a computer programmer left plenty of time to get serious about photography. I attended the Ansel Adams Yosemite workshop, at which we spent 14 half days in the field photographing, with Adams and assistants circulating to offer help. We had read his book, The Negative, that explains his zone system of exposing and developing negatives before the workshop, and many of us were applying it for the first time. In an incident that happened at a Yosemite workshop that a friend of mine attended, Morley Bear, who assisted at the workshops and had a beard like Adams, was having breakfast in the Ahwahnee Hotel surrounded by students. Ansel and Virginia were eating at a nearby table for 2 when a tourist wanting to photograph the master asked the old couple to move so he could get a better view. Ansel and Virginia picked up their coffee cups and moved, barely able to contain their laughter as the tourist got his picture of Morley. I attended 2 other workshops, each of which included a session at Adam's house in Carmel, with him doing printing demonstrations. He used one of my negatives both times. Preparing to print one of mine, he read its minimum and maximum densities with his new digital densitometer to guide his choice of printing paper contrast. Someone asked him if he could get along without a densitometer, to which he replied, "Oh yes, I could go to a friend's house and use his." After these 3 workshops, whenever I got to California in the 1970s, I called Adams and asked him if he would like to see my latest photographs. Although he was fantastically busy, he always said, "Come over at 5 o'clock," and gave me print critiques. In 1975, he announced that he wouldn't take orders for prints after the end of the year, and dealers ordered many thousands. In 1972, I had bought his most popular image, Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico, for $150. Long before all these orders were filled, it was selling for $17,500. And now his Moonrise in Hernandez is worth on the average $35,000. Long before all these orders were filled, I said he was selling for $17,500. And the price was being quoted in the Wall Street Journal. People who really weren't interested in photography were buying photographs then as investments. Thus, in his upper 70s, he continued to be a slave to the darkroom with health problems I didn't know about until much later. The most feasible way to start selling my photographs was to participate in art fairs. I was in the original Ann Arbor Street Art Fair starting the first year they allowed photography, and for 13 years thereafter. I was also in many other art fairs before gradually shifting over to galleries. It turned out to be a great stroke of luck when I started writing articles for Darkroom and Creative Camera Techniques, later called simply Photo Techniques. I became a contributing editor and wrote 100 articles. This made me known to subscribers all over the world who attended my workshops and bought prints. The magazine attracted photographers from many states and countries to my black and white printing, advanced printing, zone system, masking, view camera, and field workshops. I taught workshops in Denver and at Lake Superior Provincial Park for 20 years each, and in many other North American and a few European locations. I forgot to mention that in 1979, when our son finished college, I stopped my computer employment to concentrate on photography. The workshops provided a good living, but I now see their greater benefit to be meeting the many students who became permanent friends. A health scare at age 40 made me interested in having my photographs in museum collections in order for traces of me to remain when I'm gone. So I added my efforts to those of others to bring this about. Consequently, my photographs are in the collections of 30 museums in the United States and 5 in Europe. The U of M Museum of Art and Syracuse University each have all 23 of my limited edition portfolios of prints, totaling 227 prints. My photographs have been in some 40 solo exhibitions and a similar number of group shows. In 1977, I finally got around to reading a photography history book I should have done long before. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a print by each of the 19th century photographers mentioned in this book? So I set out to do that. The big collecting boom of the 1970s had barely affected the availability of 19th century photographs, and I was able to come very close. 2,500 prints by 225 identified photographers, starting with Talbot, one of the two inventors of photography who announced their discoveries in 1839. After nearly wearing out Helmut Gernsheim's great history of photography, it was exciting to meet him in the 1980s. Gernsheim moved from Germany to England just before World War II, and afterwards, at the suggestion of the American historian Beaumont Newhall, began collecting the 19th century photographs that were still plentiful in England and in danger of being lost forever. He even found the earliest surviving photograph made by Niepce in 1827. Carrying out extensive research in private libraries and dusty attics, he wrote 26 books that practically established the field of photography history. After collecting 35,000 distinguished 19th century images, he turned to collecting contemporary photographs. He was very good to me. He bought 37 of my prints, gave me a nice statement for the dust jacket of my Greek book, and was my host at his home in Switzerland, and mentioned me in a new edition of one of his books. The 20th century photographers represented in our collection were mostly limited to people I knew. By selling some prints to afford to buy others, about 65 Ansel Adams prints passed through our house. When I started buying from Brett Weston, his prices were much too low for a person of his stature, and we had about 200 of his prints, which I ultimately gave to museums along with our 19th century collection. Music continues to be very important to us, and we attended 30 to 40 orchestra concerts per year during my photography career. In the 1960s through 1990s, I sang about 95 performances with the U of M Choral Union. Most were with the Philadelphia and Detroit orchestras, but we sang once or twice with quite a few other American and European symphony orchestras. My motto was, if I can't play trumpet well enough to be in a major orchestra, I can at least sing with them. In 2018, I dismantled my darkroom and gave away my remaining prints in preparation for moving to Glacier Hills, a wise choice. Thank you.